Well, hi, folks. I'm Rich Anzalone, and I would like to welcome you to the first episode in the series Calvinism and Me, Like Oil and Water, which just happens to be the title of my book by Zulon Press. Now, in this series, just as with any religion, sect, or cult, we will focus on its claims, holding them to the standard of truth, God's Word, in order that we may know if they are true or false. If true, we must embrace them. If false, we must reject them. But before we get into it, I'd first like to assure you that this series is not about bashing Calvinism. Rather, I have a great concern for those Christians who are unaware and might either lean toward or accept Calvinist doctrine. As we go through the study, it will become clear that my focus is on the doctrine, whether true or false. My experience has firmly indicated to me that a great number of Christians are not familiar with Calvinism, many pastors included. I think one of the main reasons for this is that most people just cannot commit themselves to the time required for such an in-depth theological study. A great many Christians, frankly, are just not involved in serious Bible study, and others avoid the issue completely for fear of being labeled politically incorrect church style. This series represents my own experiences, which span a period of more than 25 years in which I was confronted by Calvinist doctrine. As in my book, I examine this belief system, holding it accountable to the ultimate authority, the Word of God. And although much of Calvinism can be complicated and very time-consuming, as you watch this video, you will be informed of its doctrine without having to spend endless hours in the weeds looking up, defining terms, and so on. You will know whether Calvinism is biblically true or if it is false teaching. Brief and to the point. So, let's get started. Now, one of my most recent experiences was when I was asked, Rich, why are you doing this? And after all, this issue has been debated for centuries. And since those on both sides seem immovable, do you really think you're going to change anyone's heart? Actually, it's not my job to change hearts. That's what the Spirit does. My job is simply to present the facts and let each individual judge for themselves whether or not Calvinism is biblically true or a false gospel. No matter how many books or videos, and believe me, there are many available on this subject, it seems a great number of Christians are yet unaware of Calvinism and its effects on the church, which includes them. Ignorance is not bliss. I'm reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul, I would not have you ignorant, and neither would I. Just like any religion or cult, we must investigate the claims made by such a pervasive and widespread group, especially since it claims to be the truth. Make no mistake, the Bible makes it clear that from the beginning, the church has been under attack by false teachers within as well as outside the church. Yet, we are admonished not to allow ourselves to be deceived. Let me repeat that. We are admonished not to allow ourselves to be deceived. Rather, be nourished with sound doctrine to reprove, rebuke, and exhort in truth from the Word of God. Many decades ago, as a youth pastor, I received a call from a father of one of the students. To my surprise, he complimented me on how I handled questions from several of the students who attended a different church, was related to him by his daughter. It was a very pleasant discussion, but then I was shocked by what followed. He said that as far as I was from that church's doctrine, that's how far apart you and I are as well. Confused now, I asked, what do you mean by that? He then offered that he was a Calvinist. Well, at that time, I was not familiar with Calvinism, and I wondered, what kind of Christianity is this? However, I neglected to pursue the issue, thinking that maybe he was just an oddball. But a year or two later, the subject of Calvinism came up again, and my new young pastor said, I was probably a Calvinist and didn't know it. Although I wondered how that would be possible, once again, I didn't look into it. There were several of these incidences which I cover in my book until I finally realized that I needed to study this issue. This is when I met C. Gordon Olson. He was preaching at a home church service, which I attended. I was really impressed by him. And after his message, he offered his book, Beyond Calvinism and Arminianism. And I quickly bought a copy, which became my introduction to Calvinism. However, for me, it was a slow learning process. The real turning point for me was years later after moving to the Midwest. One Sunday afternoon after dinner, a close family member, as usual, began to school me on Calvinist doctrine. He cited the rape and murder of a 3-year-old was God's will and dare not be questioned. I was really shocked, and I immediately challenged that he had better have chapter and verse to back up such a statement. His response was from Isaiah 45, verses 6 and 7, which says, There is no one besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no one else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Well, my response to this claim was that both the word evil, stated more accurately as calamity in other translations, and the context must be considered. We shall see that Calvinists are always taking verses out of their context as a proof text to support their theology. Now, all through Isaiah, in context, clearly states over and over that God is all-powerful, the creator, and rules over all the earth, and all in opposition will be put to shame, bringing calamity on them in judgment. The idea that God created evil, the equivalent of sin, is ludicrous and most misleading at best. At this point in the conversation, his daughter, a prominent pastor's wife, lovely gal, entered the room, and I asked her directly if she agreed that God created sin. Her response was, well, God created Satan, didn't he? I then replied that God did not create him as a sinful creature. He was so beautiful and so talented. He was so full of himself that he decided on his own to rise above God. Now, the $64,000 question is, why would Calvinists so misrepresent God this way? I told you the study would be shocking. Let's examine this doctrine so you'll see just how shocking it really is. Here are some quotes from leading Calvinist scholars, authors, teachers. We start with first R.C. Sproul. He said, God wills all things that come to pass. God created sin. He introduced sin into this world. And that's from Almighty Overall. In a video, he went on and said, God even ordained that evil come into the world. If he did not ordain it, it wouldn't be here, because evil has no power to overcome the sovereign, providential government of this universe. Unless God has the sovereign power over evil, he will not be able to keep that promise that bad things are working for good. Now we come to a really leading, maybe the most leading Calvinist today, John Piper, who said this: God brings about all things in accordance with his will. It isn't just that God manages to turn the evil aspects of our world to good to those who love him. It is rather that he himself brings about these evil aspects for his glory and his people's good. God's having been even brought about the Nazis' brutality at Birkenau and Auschwitz, the terrible killings of Dennis Rader, and even the sexual abuse of a young child. That's from Suffering and the Sovereignty of God. And from a video on the attack on the Twin Towers he said this: God was right there ordaining that this happen. And regarding the orphans resulting from this tragedy, he said, when they asked me, do you think God ordained the death of my daddy? I'd say yes. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now listen, folks. The most prominent Calvinist is saying that God brings about all this evil and more for his glory. This is not just a judgment on totally evil people as the old world Canaanites. This includes all evil. And why, he says, God brings it about is for his glory. He has God committing all evil to glorify himself. I ask you, is this the loving, merciful, and forgiving God of the Bible? And as twisted as this is, it only gets worse as we peel away the onion skins throughout this video. Let's see what Albert Mohler, a very prominent Calvinist, has to say. Quote, this question of sin and how God decreed, allowed, ordained that sin would happen, be allowed to happen, that human beings would be given the reality of moral choice and would misuse that choice, this is not only what he has done in order to demonstrate his love and his mercy and his grace in Jesus Christ. That was from a talk at the UCLA in 2018. Arthur Pink said this: God foreordains everything that comes to pass. That's from his book, The Sovereignty of God. Another leading Calvinist, Edwin Palmer, he said this: although sin and unbelief are contrary to what God commands, his perceptive will, God has included them in his sovereign decree, ordained them, caused them to certainly come to pass. How is it that a holy God who hates sin not only passively permits sin, but also certainly and efficaciously decrees that sin shall be? All things that happen in the world at any time in all history come to pass because God ordained them. Even sin, the fall of the devil from heaven, the fall of Adam, and every evil thought, word, and deed in all of history, including the worst sin of all, Judas's betrayal of Christ, is included in the eternal decree of our holy God. That's from his book, The 5 Points of God. Now, the above statements ought to be sufficient enough to make a clear case against this perverse Calvinist doctrine. I repeat, although it is the doctrine which is at issue, the individuals who teach this doctrine will have to account to God, not any man, certainly not to me. Many books have been filled with like kind statements. Those are just a few from Calvinist leaders. But what seems to be the main source for such a doctrine was provided to me in a pocket-sized form by that close relative I spoke of earlier. As he handed it to me, he said, "This is the greatest document ever written." It was none other than the Westminster Confession of Faith, 1647. Chapter 5, it says, God who created everything also upholds everything. He directs, regulates, and governs every creature, action, and thing from the greatest to the least by his completely wise and holy providence. He does so in accordance with his infallible knowledge and the voluntary, unchangeable purpose of his own will, all to the praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. God's providence reveals his almighty power, unknowable wisdom, and infinite goodness. His providence extends even to the fall and to all other sins of angels and men. These sins are not simply allowed by God, but are bound, ordered, and governed by him in the goodness of his wisdom and power, so that they fulfill his holy purposes. However, the sinfulness still belongs to the creature and does not proceed from God, whose holy righteousness does not and cannot cause or approve sin. Wow. See any contradiction there? Chapter 6, we read this. Our first parents were led astray by the cunning temptation of Satan and sinned in eating the forbidden fruit. It pleased God to allow them to sin, because in his wisdom and holiness, he planned to order their sin to his own glory. Do you see the false premise? Nothing in the world can happen unless God causes it to happen, is what they're saying. So God is the cause of all evil. But even though man, not simply allowed to sin, but ordered and governed and caused to sin, he is still held responsible. That is, man is still held responsible for the sin. Atheists love this convoluted theology because it shows that God is not only unjust, but the root cause of all evil in the world. I remember the comedian Flip Wilson doing a sketch on TV as a minister. He said, "The devil made me do it." In this case, you could say, God made me do it. Just think of how insulting it is to God that many of the most intelligent church leaders in the world credit our God and Savior with the most evil attributes of Satan. They do this while calling him holy and hating sin, of which he is the root cause. Please understand, my Christian, this is slander at its worst. Are you offended yet? This is only the beginning of a long list of absurdities taught by this group. Stay tuned. Because throughout these videos, as in my book and in God's book, if anyone builds on a faulty foundation, the whole building is at risk. I think that the key foundational issue for Calvinism is their view of God's sovereignty. Now, I must add that this is the issue which distracted me from C. Gordon Olson's book for a while. God certainly is sovereign over all throughout history, but does he then make everything that happens happen? And a footnote here, the word for sovereign is nowhere found in the Bible. Just saying. Let me quote again the Calvinist authority, R.C. Sproul, from his CD, Chosen by God, from 1993. After stating that all agree God is sovereign, he says, how we understand it is what divides us. I would certainly agree with that. He then goes on to quote, as authoritative, the Westminster Confession of Faith, which says, God from all eternity, by the most holy and wise counsel of his own will, did freely and immutably, without the possibility of changing, foreordain whatsoever comes to pass. He goes on, if you don't agree with this statement, you are an atheist. Well, we know from the previous quotes that this guarantees that all evil, sin, will most surely take place under God's complete direction. Sproul goes on to say, quote, if God is not sovereign, that is, controls everything, even the smallest molecule, he is not God. Did you get that? This is the qualifying standard the Calvinist imposes on God. This is what God must meet. Yes, the Calvinist God, because this is not the God of the Bible. Remember, their God doesn't merely allow sin, but also binds, orders, and governs sin. They don't think the God of the Bible is God enough to be able to foreknow and control what he doesn't decree. Calvin himself taught that man's sin is according to God's will. As noted by Dave Hunt in What Love Is This, he goes on, he says, it would deny his omniscience and omnipotence to suggest that God cannot foreknow and control what he doesn't foreordain, decree, and cause. Then Hunt quotes the Baptist Examiner. If God did not foreordain all things, then he could not know the future. Woo-hoo. Then Hunt concludes with this: he knows all beforehand because he is omniscient. Amen to that. Now, why is it that Calvinist scholars and theologians miss this basic and fundamental biblical principle of God's distinctive attribute of omniscience? Does their theology come from Scripture? Well, as I've shown, the answer is an astounding no. Their authority is, in this case, the Westminster Confession of Faith. And in my book, as I will detail in a subsequent video, the actual source, the basis and authority for Calvinist theology. You may have to fasten your seatbelts. And quoting my own book, I would like to show from Scripture the absurdity that it was God's will for sin to enter the world. He gave the 10 Commandments and many more laws and observances. Exodus 20:20 says, and Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. The mere fact that the offerings for sins were facts of life throughout Israeli life. And this speaks loud and clear of God's displeasure with sin. In 2 Chronicles we read, each shall be put to death for his own sins. Do you see how absurd it is to accuse God of creating sin, only to order the sinner to be put to death? That makes no sense. God is just. The Calvinist God is not. Here's another of many passages from Jeremiah 18, verse 11 says, oh, turn back each of you from his evil way and reform your ways and deeds. I would simply ask, does that sound like God desiring for man to sin? No. The whole Bible attests to God's hatred of sin. He who knew no sin created sin? This doctrine is not just erroneous, it's irrational, and more importantly, unscriptural. God is a spirit. Is God the spirit of error or the spirit of truth? So then, which spirit is at work in Calvinists? Now, Dave Hunt, in his book, What Love Is This?, says, to make God the author of sin is to blasphemously misrepresent him. Why would an infinitely holy God ruin his own creation by purposely creating sin? Why cause mankind to sin in order to forgive them? How would that glorify God? It turns God into a fraud who pretends that Satan, through God's own intention, creation, was his enemy. How absurd. Well, folks, now this concludes episode 1 of Calvinism and Me. I want to thank you all for watching and look forward to the next episode with you. May God bless.